Welcome to a brand new series in the restoration industry. Gokul and I are launching a restoration masterclass, and this one is going to be on mergers and acquisitions. I am very excited to have Gokul here as the resident M&A expert. This is a huge topic in the restoration industry right now, and it seems like every week, almost daily, there are new announcements coming out about mergers and acquisitions that are happening with really big companies and really big players. So over the coming weeks and months, Gokul and I are going to be releasing a number of conversations on everything that has to do with M&A. Any questions that you might have if you are approached to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling your company, just really everything you're going to need to know. So stay tuned for a lot of episodes to come. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Restoration Masterclass on M&A. So today we're talking about something else that a lot of buyers have had or sellers, have had a lot of different experience with, and that is the ownership transition. When are you telling your key people? When are you making a communication plan? You know, in one of our other episodes, you talked about how many people you have to notify, which I hadn't realized before when you talked about beyond employees, it's the TPAs, your other customers. There are so many people that need to know this news. So where do you start with a communication plan, and when do you start putting that in place?
Great question, right? So in our previous episode, we talked about the emotions of selling a business. Okay, other than putting it on the market, which is highly emotional, what we find, and even I find when I sold my company, is how do I tell my employees? I mean, I lost more sleep over that one question than pretty much everything else in the process. Because, you know, the price, the terms, you know, those were getting negotiated, you know, so they were moving along the process, right? But the one with the employees, you know, it usually happens a little bit later in the process. Okay, so once we get through the due diligence phase, you know, that's usually when you bring the key employees into the game and you'll introduce them to the buyer, right? So that's when we do it, okay? And I can tell you that most entrepreneurs care for their employees, and this is, you know, they have more sleepless nights on how to and when to tell the employees than any other thing in the process, right? So here's how we do it, right? So when we get through due diligence, when we're about 75% done through it, we will start talking about a communications plan, correct? And that would include, you know, who your key employees are, who your key customers are, because you got to communicate that to them, right? Your TPAs, right? Your leadership roles, right? And all your other partners, your CPAs, your bankers, you know, all, you know, leasing folks, you know, insurance and all that. So you got 5 big buckets of communication. And the communication is, you know, you first have to have a vision for the merger. You say, hey, why is this a good thing for the company? And then you take that to each one of these groups and you have to tailor that message. And you say, well, when you talk to the employees, you got to talk about why would it be good for them? Okay, and how they may have better opportunities for their families in the future. And you go to the customer and you say, okay, this is why this is good for you. So there's this whole plan that happens. And usually it happens, you know, when we're about 50 to 75% into due diligence, we'll start talking about communication. And there's a lot of meetings that goes on between our communications folks and the communication folks on the other side. We start crafting this message together. And then what we would do, you know, with our clients is we will actually do a dry run, okay, because it's so emotional. You know what I mean? We will actually do a couple of dry runs. So all the talking points are hammered out and we can convey this message in a very clear, simple, and we can articulate it really, really well, right? And then we'll start going to all of the stakeholders, okay? So it is a whole discipline. It takes, you know, a good 30 days from start to finish to do. Okay, and it starts when we're about 75% done at due diligence. So it starts, you know, about 30 days before closing is when we would start. But you got to craft it, and it goes through different revisions, and then you got to practice it, and then you dry run it, and then you would execute on it.
So when are you executing on it? Let's talk about the employee side. Like let's talk about that first. When are you telling your team?
You know, here's what we found to be the best, okay? So most key people on your team know that maybe it's time for a change already. So it's not as drastic as what people think it is, you know, okay? So I think especially the key employees, once the due diligence is starting to kind of get some momentum, I think the earlier you bring them into the fold, the easier it is, okay? The later you wait, the harder it becomes. Okay, so if you almost get them involved in the process early on in the game,
Yep.
okay, it becomes easier for everybody. And even their stress levels, because they get to know the buyers, they've already started to have conversations with the buyers. Maybe they've met them for a dinner or a lunch or an offsite meeting. That's the way. It's counterintuitive, right? Most owners would say, hey, I don't want to tell anybody until we're absolutely sure we're going to go to close. Okay, that hasn't worked well from all the data that we're seeing. Okay, what we know is once we have a likely chance that the deal is going to close and the due diligence is starting to get momentum, we then try to advise our clients to bring at least the key people into the process early in the game so they get involved. The sooner they get to know the buyers, the easier it is going to be. So it's counterintuitive on when you're going to talk to your key folks. Now beyond the core team, announcing it to the general public or to the general employee population, right? We could do that at the day of closing. That's okay. But I think it's highly critical, and it works much better from our experience, to bring the key folks earlier on, as early as possible into the process.
Is there a time that's too early in the process to let them know? Or have you been in a situation where it's gotten out to the entire company and maybe had a negative effect?
If you got to get in front of it. Okay, you always have to be in front of it.
Yep.
Okay, so some entrepreneurs and some of our clients actually bring in the key employees and actually selecting the buyer. Okay, so if they have 3 or 4 buyers, they will actually bring in the key employees and say, hey, you guys are going to live with them post-closing. Why don't we bring you involved in it? To me, that actually works out the best. Yeah. Because they're involved, they got a stake, they got they're involved in selecting a buyer, and then they get on board quicker into the game. And it's easier to do that. All right, so if I had a preference, that would be the preference. Okay, bring them in as early as possible. Most of the time, the entrepreneurs are pretty comfortable. Maybe right around due diligence, they kind of see, okay, everything's going well. Let's bring them in. But I would advise the sooner the better.
Okay. All right.
Totally counterintuitive, but the sooner the better. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So this actually brought up an unrelated question to this conversation, but it's something we haven't talked about, and I think it's kind of interesting. How many companies are posting their company for sale versus being what, like in recruiting, we would call it a passive candidate, right? Where we're approaching them, they're getting approached by a company to buy. So how many companies are being listed for sale right now versus being approached and they're selling once they're approached?
Yeah, sure. So, in our industry right now, everybody's getting phone calls.
Yes.
Right?
Everybody.
Everybody's getting phone calls.
Yes.
So there's good and bad, right? As in anything, correct? So the good thing is, how do you know the game plan, and how do you know strategically, whether it's a good fit or not, correct? And how do you select the best suitors? Yes. Who would be really great for your company? So everybody's got their own way of making decisions. But let me tell you what we do at our firm. Okay, we know all the buyers in the marketplace. We know strategically what they're looking for. Culturally, we've visited their headquarters. We've talked to the CEOs. We know what their 3-year, 5-year, 7-year vision is for their firm, correct? And when we bring on clients, at some point, very quickly, it gets beyond dollars and cents. It's all about fit, cultural fit, strategic fit, business fit, employee fit. And we make all of those decisions, and then we approach who would be best suited for our clients, correct? And that's what I would encourage anybody to do is, the numbers are going to take care of themselves, right? Yep. And the more successful a business is, the less concerned they are about numbers. Okay, it becomes all about the people. It becomes all about the strategic fit. It becomes all about how can we give the folks better opportunities to grow and advance their career. Yep. And those are the things you need to know about a particular buyer. You got to know what their culture is. You got to know what they're looking for in an acquisition. You got to know how you fit into the overall master plan. Okay, so these are the things that become even more important. So you kind of start with money and, I want a number, or I want to exit at this level. But let me tell you, from doing this hundreds of times, it quickly gets way beyond that. Yep. Okay, and then eventually the really great entrepreneurs focus on fit, people. I want to take care of my customers. Who's going to best take care of my key employees? That's really where the focus should be.
Perfect. All right, great information. And I think on our next video, we need to dive into what to do when you have multiple suitors and how you're picking the best company.
That's a good one.
Perfect.